Thank you very much, Michael, for a comprehensive, rich, most certainly not trivial, inspiring and challenging presentation. There's a lot in what you've said, and I'm sure that there are a lot of questions that people have. So I will invite people to ask questions from the floor. Please, we have a very big group here today, so keep your questions brief.
I'm Simon Marks Isaacson. Congratulations. I'd actually like to plant a seed rather than to ask a question.
Sure.
I'm becoming more and more conscious that whilst everybody talks about globalisation and Australia being part of a broader world, that all of our media, I'm over 40 so I still read newspapers, but also the electronic media is incredibly Anglo-focused. Part of it's because the journalists only speak English, and part of it's because of tradition. So we get news from America, we get news from London. But on the business side and on international affairs side, we only hear about many other countries when there's a plane crash, when there's some sort of scandal, or there's a national disaster. I'd like the Lowy Institute to think about what can be done to give us far more information about what other countries really think. What does Japan really think about the world at the moment? You never read about that in the newspaper or online.
Thank you.
Simon, I'm afraid you've hit upon a bit of a pet project of mine. I completely agree with you. I actually think a lot of people think, say, isn't it a great advantage that Australians speak as their native language, the language that the rest of the world is trying to learn. I actually think that's a disadvantage because it leads to a certain complacency about the rest of the world and a belief that others need to cross the linguistic and cultural gap to us rather than vice versa. In my former role with Griffith University, I launched a proposal that Australia take language study seriously, particularly Asian language study, but not only Asian language study, because it teaches us the fact that the ways in which we think about the world are structured by our language. Language structures the way you think about the world. And until you make the effort to learn another language, you don't realise that. And you don't realise the relativity of the way you see the world. And I think that is a prerequisite for this country dealing with the increasingly complex world that is unfolding around it. So I completely agree with you, and I'd very much like to continue pushing that barrow wallet at the Lowy Institute. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question.
My question is, do you think that Australia will continue to be stuck in the mindset of having to go to every war that the Americans create, such as Vietnam, Iraq and Afghanistan, in the future? Are we going to continue to be stuck in that mindset?
Oh, Tony, I think that's a major question we face, and it's not only a question for our strategic policymakers. It's actually a question about our society as a whole and where it sees itself in the world. This has been the American alliance and the need to invest in the American insurance guarantee has been an enduring bipartisan aspect of Australian foreign policy for a very long time now. It is a deeply central element to the way we think about ourselves in the world. But quite frankly, I guess the answer to your question depends on where we make the judgment about American primacy. Whether American primacy is starting to wane and what might be the consequences of that for us, or whether America will reassert and re-establish primacy for some time to come. The choices on either side of that are different. If it's the former, if American primacy is on the wane, and if the result of that is increasing systemic instability in our region, then the choices for us are very difficult, and they're going to be very searching choices, and they're going to be, I think, quite politically searing choices for us as a country and a society. So this is a major question, and it deserves all of the attention that we need to be giving it as a country, because it's got very major implications.
Chris Skinner, I very much enjoyed the clarity and the profound points that you made in your talk. One of them, which struck me particularly, was multilateralism and our difficulty in addressing that. How important would you say it is that Australia achieves its goal of a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations? Noting, by the way, from our previous questioner that Australia's role in Afghanistan is supported by the United Nations and not really an American thing at all. And comparing such a role on the Security Council on the one hand with our many efforts in other multilateral initiatives and non-proliferation and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, a Security Council role and a Security Council seat does give Australia a chance to influence a broader range of outcomes than it would be able to without a Security Council seat. So there is a real payoff. But the Security Council itself faces some real questions about its relevance and its ongoing relevance. The fact is that the membership of the Security Council no longer reflects the power realities in the world. The fact that you have major powers such as Japan and India and perhaps Brazil not on the Security Council, and yet you have seriously waning powers such as Britain and France on there, really does start to ask some real questions about the relevance of the Security Council. And it's important for more than just symbolic reasons, because the moral authority of an institution comes from, or derives partly from, its perceived relevance and its perceived reflection of the realities of the world around it. So one of the things that I think Australia can do if it gets onto the Security Council is to, restart or increase the campaign for reform of the structures of the Security Council. That is a very difficult thing to do. I would say it's actually harder to persuade those powers that really don't have a place on the Security Council to leave than it is to put new powers on there. So, that is going to be a major challenge also. These are complex issues, and I guess my approach to international institutions, Chris, is a very functionalist one. They should only be invested in to the extent that they achieve outcomes. If they're not achieving outcomes, we should not be investing in them. And there are plenty of not only underperforming but non-performing international institutions out there that perform little or no other role other than perpetuating their existence. This is a crying waste of diplomatic resources in a world that demands space and demands diplomatic resources for confronting the very real big challenges that we face.
Donald McLean. I didn't think we followed the Americans in every war. I think we were there before them in World War I and World War II. But that's not my question. How is the Lowy perceived now at this stage of its life overseas by other organisations, think tanks? What is our reputation at this stage, before you enhance it, of course?
Look, that's a tough question for me to answer because I guess it would probably be a better answer for Alan to have answered. I haven't yet done an international trip and talked to other think tanks. What I am told is that when I do make that trip, which will probably be in late August, it will not be difficult for me to see the heads of the leading international think tanks around the world. That the Lowy Institute has a profile there that opens doors. So I think there is a very positive presence there internationally. Obviously, we would like to build that presence. Frank Lowy has a vision of placing the Lowy Institute in the top 15 think tanks in the world within 5 to 10 years. I actually think that's possible. I think that given the right strategies, the right resourcing, the right business development model, we can do that. And I mean, I'm passionate about an Australian view on international relations because I am a firm believer that where you sit in the world determines how you look at the world. and what you see in the world and what possibilities and challenges you see. I'm not saying that this is the case, but I think one of the greatest challenges or the greatest evils that could befall us as a country was for us to simply outsource our understanding of the rest of the world to other countries that have bigger and more vital think tank sectors. One of the key things the Lowy Institute and other think tanks in Australia need to be focused on is developing and fostering a distinctively Australian approach to looking at the world that is grounded very much in where we are, and what we believe ourselves to be. And I think that will then determine our perspective on the world. And quite hearteningly, as you go back over nearly 100 years of Australians writing on and thinking about international relations, I think that for generations we as Australians have very much held that opinion, that we do have a distinctive view of the world. It is unique and it is important not only to us but in broader perspectives. I think in particular some of Australia's scholars of Asia have in the past and also now been valued in Europe, in North America and in Asia because of their distinctive take on the region that Australia exists in. And I think that's the sort of contribution and distinctive contribution the Lowy Institute can help foster.
I'll ask the question later on in the year.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, just here.
Cyril Van Heist, I've been intrigued for a long time that Australia, in terms of international aid, is a laggard. We produce 0.2% or something like that of our GDP. The United Nations has a target of 0.7. There's 4 tiny countries in the world that do that, the 3 Scandinavian countries and Holland, and Australia is sitting there at 0.2%. So these Scandinavian countries and Holland are not interested in international influence. What are they getting out of it? What should we learn from them, or should we stop international aid altogether? What is the Lowy Institute's view on that?
There is no Lowy Institute view. I have a personal view on this, as I'm sure all of my colleagues at the Lowy Institute have. So I'll give that to you. What's kind of interesting is that if you look at countries' level of spending on international aid and their level of spending on social security, there is almost a direct correlation. That the more a country invests of its GDP in social security and social welfare measures, the more they tend to have to invest in international aid. And I think it comes from a direct correlation that investing in helping the poorer members of society has a general social benefit, a general and more developed social benefit for all in society. I think that view is starting to gain hold internationally, and I think the current Australian government is very much disposed to that particular view. The Millennium Development Goals, the increased concern with not only the issues of poverty, but the issues of disease and HIV/AIDS, and the other almost intractable issues we face, such as climate change, environmental degradation, resource use. All of these things are suddenly converging, and I think people are increasingly seeing the connections. I certainly hope that the Rudd government gets to its policy objective of vastly increasing the amount of money that Australia puts into international aid, and that aid is used creatively in our particular region of the world to foster that sort of stability for the general good of all.
Michael Andrew McNeil, thank you for your brief today, and congratulations on the appointment.
Thank you.
It's probably more a seed than a question, but the question part would be, do other think tanks that you know of have groups like this where they promulgate their ideas to a wider audience, or is it more like an academic function but separate? And the second part, the question, probably more seed, a number of people here today put their hands in their pockets to attend. You talked about the interest in having a wider public opinion on foreign affairs in the debate in Australia, how could we use the resources of the people that are here to, rather than just sit as paying guests for chalk and talk, but to canvass their opinions and have Lowy have some mechanism for canvassing those opinions and building them into the publications that they promulgate, rather than just a bunch of sort of nodding heads that attend Wednesdays and enjoy their umbrellas.
Those umbrellas have a purpose, which I'm explaining at the end of this talk.
Can I just say that we were praying it would rain today, so everyone would appreciate our prescience in giving out umbrellas. We do have mechanisms for that, and hopefully we will build further mechanisms. The Lowy Institute blog site, The Interpreter, is foremost among our mechanisms for fostering public debate and broader consciousness of the issues that confront Australia. I think it is one of the great success stories of the Lowy Institute. It is increasingly a resource that is accessed by Australians and people from overseas. It is increasingly accessed by Australian officials and the policy community. And I have great hopes that the Interpreter will continue to attract a broader readership that is interested in these sorts of issues, that wants to engage on these sorts of issues, to contribute ideas, and to read what others are saying, how the debate is moving. So that's definitely one of the mechanisms we have. The Wednesday lunches are not the only forums we have, and they will continue to be not the only forums we have. I have some plans towards developing more interactive forums for public engagement and discussion. They're still on the drawing board, so I won't outline what they are. But I certainly do believe in the broadening and the fostering of public discussion to a much greater extent. I have to say that on the first day I returned from Hong Kong to Sydney, I flew in the morning, and I went to my hotel room, and as I was ironing my shirts, I put on the TV, and the issues that were dominating Australian public television that morning were the standoff between Gordon Ramsay and what's her name? Tracy Grimshaw. And
I shouldn't know that, should I?
There was. That's right. And there was some other incredibly pressing public. Oh, no, that's right. Therese Rain's personal trainer. And this was all over every commercial channel, and I just thought, this has to change. So we've got a big job ahead of us.
Okay, there's a gentleman at the back, and then here.
Graham Cooksley. Do you say within the next 40 years, there's any country in the world that's got the interest, the capacity and the will to physically invade Australia?
In the next 40 years?
Say 40 years, yes.
Roy? Look, capacity, will and interest. That's a very big ask. I think capacity and will over time, capacity, I think certainly the United States currently has the capacity, but neither the will nor the interest. I think over time China and possibly India, whether it'll be 40 years or a bit longer, will have the capacity. Whether they'll have the will or the interest is another question. I think New Zealand has the will and the interest, but not the capacity. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Graham.
It's good enough for the time being. Gentleman here at the striped tie.
Jay Horton, Strategist Partners. Michael, this morning I read Australia's leading business daily newspaper. I counted 300 articles and press releases, 3 of which covered Asia. 1 on Japan, 1 on Korea, and 1 on Malaysia. Can I suggest a 5th to the Lowy list of strategic objectives? And that's how does Lowy help overcome the supreme disinterest that appears to exist in Australia's business elite when it comes to Asia?
Look, thank you. Again, another hobby horse of mine, I'm afraid. I completely agree with you. I think one of the things we need to do is to mature as a society in our discussion of Asia. There is a tendency, I think, to trivialise Asia, to put Asia and Asian countries into a category of either something we can get rich from or something we're threatened by, or some aspect of an elite agenda. And I just think that this form of trivialising the most important region to us, the most important of the part of the outside world to us, holds in it very real threats for Australia. We need to start, and this has to be a broad societal thing. It needs to be not only the business community but the general community. A genuine interest in Asia for Asia's sake, a genuine interest in all aspects of the Asian region, in all aspects of Asian societies and countries and languages and cultures. This is going to be a long-term challenge. It is a question of education, but it's also a question of changing a national culture, of moving away from a national culture that tends to look over Asia to Europe and look over Asia to the United States and North America. And it needs to come from the bottom up. Unfortunately, if this is seen to be a government agenda, or if this is seen to be something that we can rely on the government that can do it, it's not going to work. Why? Because it's going to become politicised very quickly. It needs to be a broad movement, I think, a broad consciousness that comes from the bottom up, that increasingly sees that we need to take the region to our north, the closest countries to us, very seriously, and we need to engage with them as a society and properly. I also think, before I finish, that we tend to underestimate the extent to which our key allies expect us to take Asia a lot more seriously than we do. I mean, one of the, if I can be a bit provocative here, I think one of the great achievements of Australian foreign policy lies in deceiving the Americans about how much we understand Asia and how much we're interested in Asia. I've been astonished, both as an Australian official and as an academic, when I go to America and to Washington and have American academics and American government policymakers defer to any Australian view on Asia, when the fact is that quite often the level of the American debate and discussion on various Asian countries is a long way beyond ours. So how long we can keep this confidence trick going, I'm not sure. But, you know, we've got to start changing things because it's very much at the forefront of our interests.
Okay, we have time for one more question. We'd like to, gentleman here at the front.
Michael Harris from Sydney. I too would like to thank you for a very lucid presentation. I'm a little bit startled that Lowy in his wisdom has forgotten about the adolescent age group. And I think the average age of this meeting here is not conducive to the concept that Lowy might perhaps move into the adolescent area. I'm at the stage in my career where I can't remember what I had for breakfast today. And therefore I'm going to suggest to you that if you look at what the Americans do with their adolescents in terms of education into politics and whatever, there's a lot to be learnt there. And I would think that if you're looking for projects for the next decade, to move into the adolescent education area is well worth considering. I've forgotten the name of the program, but when we were there, they brought in by helicopter the, I think he may have been the Minister, the Secretary of State. I've got the advantage of a mobile encyclopedia. Who never forgets. They brought these kids in when the Minister of State was being flown in at the same time. And these kids from all over America, all about 15 or 18, and this was a regular program in which they came and they quizzed their appropriate federal minister, I'll call him a minister, about what they were worried about in America's policy then, at that moment. And it was a staggering performance. If Lowy wants to do something that I think is well worthwhile, that's his next project.
Okay.
Well, we're at the middle childhood age now. In 7 years' time, we will have reached adolescence. If we can think about it then. But Michael, please.
Look, thanks for that. I'll probably be calling on Stephen Smith in the next few weeks, so I'll certainly put that to him. That we'll fly him in on one of Frank's choppers and into the middle of an adolescent gathering, and they can fire questions at him. I'll let you know what he says.
You better let him know too. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Michael, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our speaker and our new Executive Director, Dr. Michael Wesley.